President Biden is now endorsing his Vice President, Kamala Harris, to be the nominee of the Democratic Party this year. I want to read now what the president says himself. In a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, he says he reiterates he's decided not to accept the nomination and to focus his energies on his duties as president for the remainder of his term. He goes on to say that his first decision as the party nominee in 2020 was to pick Kamala Harris as my vice president. He says, and it's been the best decision I've made. Today, he says, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. He concludes by saying, and again, this is President Biden saying, Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this. So, Kristen, we now have our moderator of Meet the Press joining us on the phone. We now have a real answer now to the question that we've had ever since this news broke that President Biden is withdrawing from this race. He is endorsing Kamala Harris to take the top of the ticket. What does the process look like from here? She obviously now would have to suggest or select, I should say, a running mate, Kristen, which is another process that will have to unfold over the course of the next couple of weeks before the Democratic convention.
That's right. And it's our understanding that the vice president had actually started that process, Hallie. And this is not a surprise. Again, this moment is stunning when you take a step back and really think about what is unfolding. And yet, this is where we believed this was heading if and when President Biden did make that ultimate decision to drop out of the race. There was so much pressure on him from within the party to choose Kamala Harris, to endorse Kamala Harris as his vice president, because think about the backlash had he not done this. I think there's also an urgency to have an answer to the question, who will replace him at the top of the ticket, and just a deep concern that if there were to be a so-called mini primary, that would ultimately expend a lot of time, a lot of resources that the party just does not think it has at this point. So again, Hallie, not overwhelmingly surprising that he is endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. And again, she has started the process of looking for a potential running mate, undoubtedly looking at a number of governors all across this country. But again, just a really stunning moment that the President of the United States has now officially announced he's not seeking re-election and is passing the torch, as those protesters yesterday outside of the White House had urged him to do, to pass the torch. He has now done that, Hallie.
One of the questions, of course, Kristen, is does this put Democrats in a better position against former President Trump, in a relatively equal position as if it were President Biden on the ticket? When you look at some of the polling, there are some surveys, some numbers that suggest that the vice president polls slightly better than President Biden did against former President Trump. But there's some polling that suggests it's fairly even here. So there's a real question mark, of course, moving forward as to what this means politically for Democrats come November, Kristen.
There is a big question mark, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Look, she's competitive with him. And that's what I think President Biden wanted to see before he made that official decision to pass the torch, as it were, to his vice president. He wanted to see that she's competitive, and the polls suggest she is very competitive. And look, I've been talking to Democrats who say this is a moment in which she can be reintroduced to the country, not just on the campaign trail, but also when you think about it, the convention. Hallie, think about the convention that you and I just covered in Milwaukee. All of that attention will now be foisted upon the vice president as she prepares to take the mantle of the Democratic nomination. So I think that that is an opportunity, and the Democratic Party believes that is a potential strength and could help them in the polls and with some of those undecided, moderate, independent voters who are going to be so critical in November. And by the way, the Trump campaign has already set its sights on the vice president. They've already started doing their own opposition research to lay out the case against her, Hallie.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.